Well, hello and welcome to On Teaching. Hey, this is the podcast where we talk about all things related to teaching. Our goal is to improve the nature of education by empowering teachers. We want to have some creative conversations. We want to talk about some difficult questions. And we want to reframe the role of the teacher to something that's more appropriate, where we're helping students along instead of pushing them. You know the old saying, you can drag a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Well, very true. So let's learn how to make the students thirsty, then offer water, right? So here's what we're going to be talking about today. This is the podcast for you if you have ever wondered what a teacher can learn from an FBI agent. Promise. Now, what we're going to be talking about is a book written by Chris Voss. He was the former head of the International Hostage Negotiation Unit for the FBI. Completely rewrote the book on hostage negotiation. What this book means to me is what this book is to me. It's a manual on how to navigate conflict. And it's been personally very impactful, professionally as well. And so what we're going to kind of do is we're going to kind of extract some of the big ideas that are most applicable to education, get them out on the table, run through two scenarios and how we can use these ideas in those particular situations, and call it good. The book's called Never Split the Difference. He talks about why the book is titled that, and it's a little misleading. It's probably not what you think. In fact, a lot of what he says in here is absolutely solid, but it's counterintuitive. So we'll get into that in just a minute. Here's one thing I want to ask you, though, first. I would like you to get involved. I really want to help change education, but I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the facilities to do that. I don't have the reach. I want to hear from you. I want us to talk together. I think we all want to see education improve. We know where we are now. We know where we want to go. We just don't know exactly how to get there, but together we can. So I want to hear from you. I want this to be a dialogue. I want it to be a discourse. I want us to engage in civil disagreement. You can do that by getting involved in our Facebook group, leaving comments on our YouTube channel, reading our blog, checking out our website, onteaching.org. I look forward to seeing you there. Also, if you know of somebody who would be interested in some of the things we're discussing, please share it with them. Help the word get out there. So comment, like, share. It helps us to get the word out there. I think that what we're doing is important. If you agree, please do so. Please share. Please like, comment, get involved. All right, so let's get to it. Chris Voss literally flipped the transcript on its head. The transcript used to be of hostage negotiation would be FBI's the authority, and you better do what we say or else. And he turned that on its head. And he did that in a number of ways that he articulates very well in his book. And he kind of gives you an outline that you can have some cognitive access to his schema. And through practice and reflection, you can actually integrate that into your own way of approaching the world and dealing with conflict. And the end result is you're going to be better at dealing with conflict. You're going to be better at making relationships. And, well, it's going to make you for me personally, I can speak for myself. I think it's helped me in my personal life, and I know it's helped me in my professional life. I would highly advise you to buy the book, the physical copy, because you're going to want to take notes. You're going to want to put little markers in there so you can review. You can go back to difficult concepts and ideas and use that for your own reflection and development. Now, one of the biggest takeaways for me personally that I'd like to share with you first is the idea that we should approach life with a set of hypotheses instead of a set of assertions. I'm a person that I have a lot of conviction. I know what I know, and I do what I do, and come hell or high water, it's getting done. This is what I know, this is what I believe. And like a lot of people, what a lot of people do, especially educated people, what a lot of educated people do is they seek confirming information. They seek information that aligns with what they believe, and they use that to bolster their argument. And anything that's contradictory, we get really good at poking holes in it and discounting it. It's a little different, though. if you approach life with a set of hypotheses. So, say for example, you're dealing with a parent. Instead of saying, hey, I know who this kind of person is, I know what they want, I know where this is going, you say, hey, I think this is what I believe is. I think this is what's going to happen. And what ends up happening is when you get new information, you can evaluate it more accurately. If it's contrary to your hypothesis, then you're going to reshape your hypothesis and head in a new direction that's more appropriate for the situation. However, if you find that aligns and fits with your hypothesis, then you have confirmation that you're on the right path. Much different way. We have a much different emotional reaction to information when we are approaching situations with that hypothesis framework instead of the assertion framework. So for me personally, I know we all have different cross to bear. We have different things to learn, different ways to develop. But for me personally, that was a big takeaway from the book for me. So let's get to it, right? Let's here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to share with you 11 components, 11 lessons that I got from the book that I think apply very directly to some of the engagements that we as teachers have. We're always in conflict, right? We're in conflict with students probably daily, parents frequently, maybe weekly, and it's not uncommon to be in conflict with other teachers, administrators, counselors, whatever. So let's get to it. The first big idea that Chris Voss shared is that when we're dealing with conflict, we need to make sure that we are connecting with the counterpart. It's really easy to be upset and say, hey, I don't like that person. Whereas in reality, you probably don't even know that person. The reality of it is you probably just don't like the situation and the other person instigated it. And so you place all of that emotion on, all that judgment on the person instead of the situation. And so it's really, really important to make a connection with that counterpart. You want them to understand that you're trying to resolve the conflict, that you also want them to understand that you are perceptive and that you're insightful. You want them to also understand that this is not a me versus you situation that you are trying to seek. It's often the case that, when you have a conflict, you're in one box, they're in another box. And we want to make sure, it's often human nature to make sure that those two boxes stay separate. But it's really important in order to make that connection by putting you guys both in a box that contains both of those issues. We're all in this together. We might be having some conflict right here, but we can narrow that gap. And a lot of what Chris shares in his book is really talking about narrowing that gap between you and your counterpart in the conflict. Now, one of the best ways to do this that I've found, for me personally, with my style of communication, is to use the F word. Fair. Yeah, you can preemptively use the F word, and it's super powerful, and I do this quite often. What I'll do is at the beginning of a conversation that's dealing with a conflict, I'll say, hey, look, it's really, really important to me to be fair. Fairness is one of my priorities. So if at any time I'm being unfair, I need you to stop me. Stop me and let me know, and I will go back and I will fix it. Oh, that is a super powerful thing, and that can really kind of de-escalate things, and that is a huge step towards narrowing that gap between you and them. Okay, second one that Chris talks about that is really applicable to students or to teachers is active listening, and this one's difficult for me. The idea with active listening is that you need to turn off that internal dialogue, and you need to really, really work to hear and understand what the person is saying. In order to be insightful and perceptive, you got to do this, right? In order for them to believe that you're insightful and perceptive, you have to do this. So one way that you can really help yourself is you listen, you try to understand, and then you ask clarifying questions in a positive, upbeat, but yet sincere voice. You ask clarifying questions. I understand that you're saying this. I understand this is how you're feeling. It seems to me that, and you're reciting, you're paraphrasing what they just said, or sometimes you're doing something more specifically. You're doing what's called mirroring, which is number 3. Mirroring is where you use the exact language and phrases as your counterpart. Now, you're not imitating them. You're not mimicking their voice or their cadence. You're just using some of the same language. And what that really does, well, there's Chris in his book, he talks about some of the the human psychology behind this and how we mirror each other, and that makes us feel more kinship with one another. And so you're kind of artificially instigating this whole thing to also further close that gap between you and your counterpart. But the example he gives in the book is something along these lines. Say your counterpart says, "Hey, I'm very upset that you did not notify me sooner." An appropriate response using mirroring could be, "I'm sorry that I did not notify you sooner." Okay, number 4. Oh man, number 4. Excuse me. Allergies are terrible. I don't know if you guys can hear the wind. Oh man. Anyway, I had to get a drink there. I apologize. So, number 4 seems like an oxymoron to me. It's called tactical empathy. Now, empathy is recognizing the need in another and taking action to serve that need. Sympathy is different. Sympathy is either you have the same exact need as that other person, or their need evokes a need in yourself and you take action to serve your own need. Now, you might serve your own need by taking care of that other person's need. That person is suffering. You can make that not suffer. You don't feel bad anymore. That's not empathy. That's sympathy. Empathy is recognizing the other person's need, but not taking it on, but taking action to serve that need for the other person. That's what empathy is. It's super powerful. And when you come to understand, by using empathy, when you come to understand where another person's coming from, their behavior is going to make more sense. They're going to be more predictable to you because you're going to understand it. So that empathy also is going to help really create that trust and, once again, close that gap. Now, the reason he calls it tactical empathy is because you're really trying to be careful to understand and listen, but the tactical part is that you're signaling that you understand. You're letting them know that you understand, and that's the tactical part. You're making sure they know that you are being empathetic. Number 5 is one that I use a lot. This one's easy for me. It's labeling. The idea with labeling is what you do is you're going to vocalize the other person's fears and stresses. And what that does is it kind of puts all of that scary stuff out on the table. And when it's out in the open, it's less scary. It's right there. We can deal with it a little better because it's been said. It might be uncomfortable at first, but once it's out there, it's okay. And you can do that. It's really important to make sure you do that in a non-offensive way. You can say, "Hey, what I'm hearing is that you're afraid of this happening. Am I right?" Really powerful one. Number 6 is another one that I am good at. This is probably the last one that I'm good at. It's called an accusation audit. And what that is when you believe, let's say your counterpart is fairly hostile and aggressive and they seem angry. They most likely, you would be probably well founded in your belief that they hold some less than flattering ideas about you. So an accusation audit is when you say those things. And here's how I do it. And it works really, really well, especially with students. I would say something like, "Look, I know that I must seem to be unreasonable, stuffy, old-fashioned, maybe even downright mean and vindictive. But," and then you can continue. What that does is it takes all of those nasty thoughts and it puts them out there. But it puts them out there by you about yourself, and the other person hears it. And they realize that that's really unfair. That's not right. That's not acting in good faith. And what they end up doing is they end up self-governing a little better. It really does help to de-escalate things, and it once again closes that gap between you and that other person so that you can start to work together to arrive at the best solution. The best solution is not always a compromise. A lot of the time it is their way or your way. And in a situation with a teacher, it's sometimes hard to know which that is, which one it is, if it's your way or the other person's way. In the case of the FBI negotiator, unless you're on the side of somebody that's kidnapped some people because they're going to behead them unless they get paid, that one's pretty cut and dry. We're most likely going to be on the side of releasing those hostages, right? Anyway. Number 7 is, it's a little bit tricky, but the idea, it's tricky for me to do, but the idea is rock solid. So look, you're not having a conflict if there's not something that's disagreeable. Now, some of the past wisdom that was shared about getting involved with negotiations or sales even was getting to yes, having people say yes, and trying to build a snowball of yes, 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 and agreeability. A lot of the time, well, that tied back to, remember we shared the story about Chris Voss working at the suicide hotline and getting that guy to say yes to everything, and it didn't work, and it was a terrible experience. Well, that's what this is like. By allowing the person to say no, they're exerting control and direction. They're directing that conversation. It makes them feel like they're in the. That makes them feel like they're in the driver's seat. That they have some agency over what's happening, and when they do, they're going to calm down. And when they calm down, the emotions kind of settle a little bit. You can think more clearly. You can discuss. You can be a lot more reasonable. So, getting them to be able to say no to something is a very powerful thing, because once again it helps them to feel like they have agency over what's happening. They don't feel like they have to fight tooth and nail with every little thing. You're not going to make them suffer the death by 1,000 cuts. They can go along to get along because they're in control of some things. So that one's really tricky, but we'll talk about that in just a second. Number 8, let's talk. It's summarizing. It's you summarizing what the other person has said, what they want, what they feel, in order to get them to say something like, "Oh, that's right. You're right. That's right. You got it." It makes them feel that you guys are actually together, that you really do understand where they're coming from. The way you do that is that you repeat what they're saying, you ask for clarification, and you do so in a way that you're responding. You're making responses based on your active listening, you're mirroring, and you're getting them to say, "Oh, you get it now." It could be something like, "So what you're telling me is that even though you've been doing all your homework, you're still getting a bad quiz grade, and that's super frustrating." Something like that, right? Anyway, number 9, super powerful one. This is one I struggle with, but I wish to get better at, and I'm going to continue to practice. And this is reframing the discussion. This is rooted in, well, human nature. We are far more motivated to take action to avoid a loss than we are motivated to take action to gain something. We will go much further to prevent losing than we will to gaining. So one way you can use this to, well, not just your benefit, but the benefit of the other party, because as teachers, it's not us versus them. The way we can use this to benefit the student is by reframing what it is they want to gain as what it is, as them taking steps to avoid losing something. So, hey, I want to get a good grade in the class, right? So instead of focusing on that, you start saying, well, if you don't really learn the material correctly, you might lose out on scholarships or opportunities, or you might not have the foundation you're going to need as you move forward in your academic career. So having them focus on what they might lose if they don't do what it is that you want them to do, instead of looking at what it is they're going to gain if they get their way, really, really powerful. Okay, number 10, we got 2 more, 10 and 11. Number 10 is something he calls calibrated questions. And this is both, on one hand, simple, and on the other hand, extremely complicated. So what the idea behind a calibrated question is that you're asking an open-ended question to your counterpart, usually a how or a what question. It really helps them to feel like they're in the driver's seat. But what the idea is you want to take whatever the roadblock that you have that prevents you from giving them exactly what they want, you take that roadblock and you make it their problem to resolve. Now, the questions themselves are usually really simple, like, how can I do that? The example he gave was, say there's a hostage. Like he gave some real life examples from his work with this, but there's a hostage situation. He's on the phone with the hostage taker. The hostage taker wants ransom. The old playbook would say, the old FBI negotiation playbook would say that the negotiator demand with authority to speak to the hostages before we proceed. Well, what Chris would do is say, wow, so you want this money? How can I do that if I don't even know the person's alive? And so what it does is it takes that roadblock that Chris has, presents it to his counterpart, and basically says, "Hey, solve the problem for us." Really, really powerful. The last one, implementation. Oh man, this one's big. Implementation is, oh man, it's tricky. This is the follow through. This one's tough with students, especially, especially when they're talking about making permanent changes. The idea is this: it's super easy to secure a false promise. And it might not even be a lie. They might be sincere when they say, okay, I'm going to do this. But in order for a solution to work, in order for the resolution to a conflict to be effective, it has to be executed. The follow through has to be there, and that starts with how. So there are lots of ways to fumble this, and I think I've found a lot of them myself personally. But here's the big idea. If you, as the teacher, articulate the how, it's not going to happen. So I don't remember if I shared this with you or not. I thought about it quite a bit, and I referenced it earlier, but now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think I actually did share this with you. So here's the thing. Early in Chris's career, he was working for the FBI. He didn't have a psychology or psychiatry background at all, but he wanted to be a negotiator. And so his boss at the FBI said no. Not just no, hell no, goodbye, go pound sand. He was persistent. So eventually she said, well, if you volunteer at the Suicide Hotline Center for 6 months, we'll talk about it. So he did. And at that call center, he had an observation by whoever ran the center. So Chris, during the observation, received a phone call from a frequent caller who was suicidal. And Chris got the guy to admit, yeah, I shouldn't commit suicide. I've got a lot to live for. And then Chris identified the problem the guy was suffering, and then outlined a whole bunch of solutions and all these steps that the guy should take. And the guy's just being agreeable. Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll do that. Okay, good. I'll do it. The call ended. Chris felt great. He thought he nailed his observation. So he goes to sit with the boss of the call center. The boss said, that is single-handedly the worst, the most pathetic call I have ever heard. Chris was really shocked. But the reason it was the worst call is that all of the identification of the problems and all of the solutions came from Chris, and the other guy was just being agreeable so Chris would shut up. And of course, in response, as soon as he hung up, he had no intention of doing any of those things, but even worse, he wasn't going to reach out for help from them anymore. So the idea is that the identification of the problem, well, of course, you as the teacher need to hold it. But if you're dealing with a parent if you're in conflict with your counterpart has to see that problem. And they're not going to see it because you told it to them. They have to see it their own way. A lot of that can come from the calibrated questions. And then that calibrated question can also lead them to devising all the solutions that you really wanted anyway. So it's a trick to get them to see the problem and then spit out the answers. And once that how is there, there's far more likely that they're going to follow through, especially if they understand that follow through is going to help them to avoid a loss. So that's a lot of information right there. Man, see what I mean? Got to buy the book, take notes, review it. It's a ton. So now let's do 2 quick vignettes. That's a good word in educationese, right? Let's do quick little two quick little stories, two quick exchanges. One's between you as a teacher and an unhappy student. The other is between you as a teacher and an unhappy parent. Now, in his book, he talks quite frequently about dealing with either unreasonable bosses or mean bosses or just conflicts that can arise between you and your employer. He does a great job of those, and I'll leave those for you to explore on your own. But let's get into the first one now, talking about discussing a conversation, how to guide a conversation with some of these principles that you might have between an unhappy student and yourself. So student approaches you and says, hey, why is my grade so low? Now, of course, you can't have this conversation in passing. If there's not time, you could say, hey, I would like to talk to you about that. but right now we don't really have time to get into it. Can you come see me? And then you'd name a time when both of you will have time to speak more leisurely, right? So between classes and things like that, this is not the place. So anyway, hey, the student comes up and says, hey, why is my grade so low? And you say, well, let's take a look. Hey, you seem to be really upset. Do you think your low grade is unfair? Now, a couple things I want to point out right here. First of all, this is being very receptive to their feelings, and it begins to place you anyway, in a position of a helper, and you're preemptively using the F word to disarm the student. You're putting fairness out there on the table in a very powerful way. Now, from here, the student can respond in all kinds of ways, but it typically goes something along these lines with what I've done. The student will say, well, I just want a better grade. They often won't say that their grade's unfair. They usually know better. And if they do believe the grade's unfair, they already have something specific in mind, and they're already going to share that with you. It'd be something like, I think you entered my test score wrong, and here's my test score. Something like that, okay? So anyway, student will say, hey, I want a better grade. And you can say, well, so you're not happy with how things are going. Is that right? The student would say, no, of course. And then it's often been my experience that right then and there, after this brief exchange, why are my grades so low? Well, let's take a look. You seem upset. Do you think your grade is unfair? Well, no, I just want a better grade. So you're unhappy with how things are going. Usually, at that point, the student will start to identify a lot of the things that need to change. And this will be all the foundation you need to have a very productive conversation with that student, that you've closed that gap. But sometimes not, right? So let's talk about when the gap's not quite closed yet. So you say, hey, so you're not happy with how things are going, huh? And the student just says no, and you say, well, all right, you're going to do some labeling here next. You're going to say, well, are you afraid your parents are going to disown you, or that you're going to be destitute because of your grade in this class? Now, that's my style of labeling. There's a little bit of humor involved. Everybody has to develop their own style, but labeling their fears right there gets it out in the open. It kind of helps to bring them down a little bit. The student's going to say something like, well, in my experience, this is what they've said, and something like, well, not quite that bad, but I know I'm going to get in trouble. I don't want to get in trouble. And I want to get a good GPA because I want to go to college. What you can say is, what I understand is that you're afraid of getting in trouble at home and also worried about not getting to college. The student's going to say, yeah, that's right. Now, what you've done is you begin to flip that script already. What you've begun to do is you've started reframing that conversation. So instead of the student saying, hey, I want to get a good grade, now it's, if I don't take action, I might lose out on these things because of a bad grade. So it's not a negative consequence. It's not punishing them. It's just getting them to look at what it is they might lose if things don't go well from here forward. Okay? So what you can follow up with that is it's really important. I believe sometimes this is extremely important for some students. You need to make sure students understand your role in their success. So you could say something like, well, look, my job is to make sure that you're ready to go to college. That's, of course, if college preparedness is an appropriate goal for your class, right? But anyway, look, it's my job to make sure you're ready to go to college. I want to do a good job for you. If I'm being unfair, please let me know. Here's what we're going to do. I want us to look at what I can do to help you with your grade. Do you have any ideas? What can I do to help you? A student might say something like, well, can I do extra credit? Or something like that, right? Something that's really not going to have long-term benefit. What you can say is, the extra credit, that might help your grade now by bumping it up a little bit, but is that really going to help you get ready for college? I'm not sure that's the best way. Let me ask you a very important question that might help us understand your grade and what we can do about it. What is it that's causing your bad grade? Is there anything that you're doing to hurt your own performance that might also carry forward with you to college and cause even bigger problems there? Now, you already know most likely what the kid's doing. But once again, you don't want to just lay it all out there for them. You want them to lay it all out there. You want them to identify the problem, because then they're going to start working to identify the solutions. So that is a type of a calibrated question right there. And the student might say something like, this is a typical response. They might say, well, I don't always pay attention very well in class. Sometimes I get a little confused and I don't ask a question, then I just kind of space out and then I feel buried. And what you can respond with is, yeah, I've done something like that myself. Needs to be true though, needs to be sincere. But that's going to help close that gap, show that you guys have suffered a similar lot, right? And then what you can share with is like, hey, I've seen some students struggle with this, but they came up with a solution, a new habit. Do you want to know what it is? And the student might say, well, I don't want to hear just ask the question. It makes me feel stupid when I ask a question in class. One really good response to this is to ask them to pick a student they think of as smart and successful. I'm going to use the name Joe, right? So you could ask a student, hey, do you think Joe feels stupid when she asks a question in class? Students could say, well, of course not. She's super smart. You can point out that Joe feels stupid when she's asking the question, guaranteed. But she also understands that learning and becoming smart is more important than having people think that she's dumb. But let's talk about the other solution you can try. When you're confused, what I want you to do is write in your notes and leave space for the answer. Write your question down in your notes, leaving space. Maybe you'll feel courageous enough to ask the question right then and there, but courage only happens when you're scared, by the way. But maybe you're not, and that's okay. If you're not willing to ask the question yet, ask me after class. Ask a friend. Now, I know this is offering a solution, but we're talking about dealing with kids, not adults. So a lot of the time with specific advice like this, it's appropriate to offer it, right? Now, if, two things. Offering that piece of advice saying that you've seen other kids do it might be a white lie. And a lot of this stuff that Chris Voss shares might seem manipulative, but I don't believe that it's in a bad spirit, and there's nothing deceptive involved. This might be slightly deceptive, but I think it's in the spirit of what's best for the student, and it's only a lie the first time because it's going to work once they do it, right? And the next time you had a conversation, it's not a lie. Anyway, I digress. Let's move on, right? One thing you want to do when that student asks the question is you want to share that question with the whole class later on, and you want to do it in a way that it becomes exposed that lots of people benefited from this question being discussed, because then it changes that student's perception of asking a question from something that they're embarrassed about to actually something that helps everybody and makes them feel more connected to the success of everybody around them. It makes them feel more important. Anyway, super, super important thing to do right there. But approaching that kind of conversation about grades in that way, where you're getting students to articulate what it is that's causing the problems, that you put yourself in a role where you're there to help them, and maybe you can offer a little bit of advice, and you're also looking at the future, and you're teaching students about your grades, and or you're teaching students about your role in their grades. Super powerful. It's really great. So I really like using the accusation audit. I didn't use it in this example, but we did do the labeling. That's really powerful with students. And then dropping the F-bomb, fairness, really, really important. But getting them to articulate what they really want, and then reframing that if needed to show them that the solution you really want them to go after will help prevent them from incurring a loss. Really, really powerful. Okay, so let's do the last one. Let's get into the last one right here. Let's talk about dealing with an angry parent. So you're meeting with a mother. The mother says, hey, I think it's unfair that my child is failing your class. She's gone through so much this semester. She deserves a break. Now, if a parent approaches you with the word fair already, it's tough. You've got a big gap to close. Okay, she's already used fair as a weapon, and she suggested that you're being unfair. That's a tough thing to fix. Okay, so let's just read you through the whole thing, and then we go back and we kind of talk about it, right? So mother says, it's unfair my child is failing your class. She's gone through so much this semester and she deserves a break. Teacher would say, sorry to hear of those problems outside of school. I want to understand where you're coming from so that we can make this fair. Can you tell me a little bit about what's been going on? What's happening? The mother. There's been a death in the family, and that's been very hard on her. She's been dealing with depression, and now, because of her grades, a lot of anxiety. Teacher. Sometimes dealing with academics really does need to take a back seat. It's not as important as personal health or family issues. Grades aren't everything. It must be really hard on her to have fallen behind because of these issues, and now she probably feels even worse because of her bad grades. I can see how this might seem unfair. Like life is just piling one thing on after another. It's just snowballing out of control. Mother would say something like, yeah, that's how it feels. Teacher. I do not want her grade to cause her anxiety. What can I do? Mother. Can you let her turn in all of her missing work? Teacher. What is it that we're really trying to accomplish here? Mother. I want my daughter to have a passing grade. Teacher. I do too. She's a bright kid with a lot of great things ahead of her. Let me ask you another question. What barriers does this class provide to her goals in adulthood? Mother. She wants to go to college to be a veterinarian. Teacher. That would be a great job. I could really see her thriving in that. That path has a lot of academics involved. It's a really competitive admissions process as well. She's going to have to get great grades in college. I know she can do it. I want to help her with this. Mother. Yes, she's very bright and she's a hard worker. Teacher. Would you be concerned that just passing this class without learning the content might provide roadblocks in her future? Mother. She's very bright. She'll get caught up. I'm certain of it. If you could just let her turn her missing work, she'll be right back on the right track and everything's going to go fine. Teacher. My job is to make sure that she's fulfilled the requirements of this course by demonstrating proficiency. That way, I know she's on the right path, and if she's not on the right path, then I can take action to help put her on the right path. It's really important that I know that she's in the right place when she leaves this class. How can I just let her turn in all of her semester's work at the last minute? Mother. I just want her to pass the class. Teacher. I think we both want her to be successful in her future pursuits. I'm very concerned about further compounding these struggles she's facing right now by trading in a short-term reward for a long-term consequence. I don't want to put her in an even worse position by trying to help and doing the wrong thing. Is there a way she can demonstrate proficiency with this course? Is there another way she can go about that? Because if she's got it, then I'm very happy for her and she's on the right path. But if she doesn't have it, then I can't help her because I don't know it. And just turning in all the late work doesn't help me know. So we can imagine where it might go from here. All kinds of places. It would really depend on how sincere the mother is, what her real goals are. But either way, what the teacher did in this conversation is they rephrased the situation to say, hey, if I give you what you want, you have a short-term gain. They rephrased that to say, hey, if I give you what you want, this is what we might lose. And that's very motivating. To avoid a loss is extremely motivating. The real issue in this kind of situation is that the mother's feeling upset for the daughter, and it's often the case that parents want to resolve whatever issue is upsetting their child because they're upset when their child's upset, and when their child is soothed, they're soothed. So they're actually serving their own needs. She's not really, it's often the case the parent really does want what's best for the child, but they're emotionally caught up in it. They're not seeing clearly. And what they really want is the child to feel better so they'll feel better. So, tricky thing. There's a lot here. Dealing with people is a complicated thing. I hope that I've given you some ideas. I hope I've really encouraged you to take a look at this book. Never Split the Difference. Anyway, if there's been something in here that's in this podcast that's jumped out at you, let me know. If there's something you disagree with, let me know. If comment, like, share if you found it enjoyable. Share it with other people that might be interested in exploring some new ways to approach teaching from within the classroom, to start instigating some change from within. Hey, great book. I hope you read it. I want to hear from you. Till next time, be well.